Okay, with Matthew Ellis, Privilege is a short film play at the Horror Underground Film Festival. Very unique film. I'll give the teaser. It's about the privileged white man, and it's made by a privileged white man, male. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely.
And you also starred, I should say, and you played the quote unquote antagonist, the privileged white guy, I guess, right, in the movie.
That's correct. Yeah, I decided to take the hit for that one.
Did you ever think about playing the other role?
And in the beginning, I actually didn't want to play any of them.
Okay.
But it was during the actors strike. So trying to fill out roles, figuring out who was best for what. I ended up finding this guy who was just incredible to play the landlord character. And so the chemistry between him and I worked out best for that. So I just made the decision that, hey, you know what? I'll just go ahead and play the main character for it.
Gotcha. Yeah, the other guy, he's fantastic. Like it's everybody's kind of great in this film. So it's a very unique. Obviously, I see a lot of short films, and this is kind of. I didn't even know where to place this when I first saw it. I was like, it's a little bit. It's kind of like tone wise. It kind of shifts gears. It goes to the past. It kind of gives us like this kind of like like a monologue about the history of white people, I guess. And but it's all kind of done comedically. I guess that's the tone. I guess right, comedy.
Yeah, and in fact, that's kind of where it started. There's some local comedians that do stand up here in New York where they do this PowerPoint presentation based off of the holidays. And I have this character that I do called Pistachio that basically explained the history of Thanksgiving. It's like the true history. And so I was able to warp it in this way where it was in thousands of years ago, the first white male, made this deal with a demon, and that went really well at that particular show. So I ended up, spending some time, and it just kept coming back to me. So I was like, all right, I had a scene in my mind of a particular killing that I thought was really horrific and intense, and I was able to figure out how both of those could work together, and that's where this bizarre comedic flashing forward back in time element kind of came in.
Gotcha. And then so what is your experience? Because you have a funny like director's bio as well, where like you said you're a French horn player, then you compose music, and then you're a model in Japan, and then you said you failed at a lot of things. But it seems like you succeeded in a lot of things. Like it seems like you did a lot of interesting things that perhaps you didn't hit
Yeah, I have.
the peak of it, but it seems like you succeeded in a lot of things before you started filming.
I've definitely Yeah, I've definitely tried to do a lot of things. Whether they panned out to the fullest extent
Sure.
is maybe more of a narrative of like Western culture and how you have to be the best of, LeBron James at everything you do. But I've kind of just taken everything that I've fancied or found interest in, and I just love process. That's probably my favorite thing. I know everyone loves, getting the result, but I really find the process part so fascinating. So I've kind of taken a little bit of my experience from everything and infused that in everything I do. So I'm a musician first, but then my experience working on set as a model in Japan kind of gave me a different perspective on how they look at things, and eventually that led to how they view film and cinema.
You're
And
talking
then
about the Japanese culture.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And how do
What they
they, in a general sense, how do they look at how they
Well,
differentiate between the Western culture?
I would say when I first got there, one of my friends, I met his wife, and I asked her because there's all these old Buddhist temples, and we were visiting them, and it was really profound. And I asked her, well, what do the Japanese people believe in? And she's like, nothing. And I was like, well, what do you think happens to you after death? And she's like, nothing. There's only darkness. And I was like, oh, I think this is the country for me. So I stayed there, and it's interesting what they find scary versus what the United States finds scary. Like robots is probably the best example. In the United States, AI robots, they are the villain.
Yeah.
You Terminator, things like that. In Japan, they're the hero. They're cute and they save the world. But the things that they find are much more almost supernatural, but attached to history, like very, very old, almost like spirits. And that I found a little more frightening. And so I like or I tend to like those kinds of stories.
Gotcha. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So, and then, but in terms of making films, do they, from a structural standpoint, do they going on a set? I'm sure you've been on sets in the United States. Is a set different? Like the set experience different from two cultures?
Well, the set experience I had was more like photography with like the
Okay.
video being behind the scenes, just because we were doing more like, spring, summer, fall, winter fashion kind of stuff. But it was very meticulous. And the hierarchy is kind of similar, right? Like, I think in the United States on set, it's more like the assistant director is commanding everything that goes through their department, which gets bled out through all the other departments. They all cohesively work with each other on that level. There, it's way more structured in the sense of everybody has their very specific place. And they kept using this phrase over and over that I found fascinating, but also kind of sad, where it's the nail that sticks up is the nail that gets bashed in. So sticking out isn't necessarily something that is celebrated. Whereas in the United States, I feel like we kind of honor and glorify those kinds of people.
Really? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, no. So can I give away the ending?
Oh, for sure.
Okay, so is there going to be a sequel where your character kills Ted Cruz?
I mean, I would love that because I think that'd be hilarious. But obviously, a lot of copyright and issues with that.
Yeah,
You can get away with it in a short film,
sure you
but
can. Yeah,
originally I wrote this as a feature film, so it's like has a whole bigger story and things like that. But I ended up making a shorter version of this,
yeah,
just to kind. I don't like saying proof of concept because I think each story should live on its own.
yeah.
So that was a way for me to kind of tie it in a nice little button at the end that he has to do more than just one.
Well, yeah, you're setting up his origin story, right? Like in this
Correct.
film, it's a 13-minute origin story. It's like almost like a teaser of the first act in a sense. And then
Correct.
the second act is that he's going on a mission to kill all the crazy right wingers, I guess.
Yeah, well, and it goes beyond that even in like the feature version. And he
Yeah,
keeps getting away with it because he's a white guy, which
yeah,
is an element that I wanted to throw. There's a cop character that catches on to him, and it may or may not come into like a love story and all that kind of thing. So it's yeah, there's a lot of room to play with the concept.
yeah. No, and I think it's kind of a well, kind of it's a very timely film too in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a little older, but I when I was in high school, this was like in the early 2000s, like right when 9/11 happened.
Mhm.
And at my high school, it was very diverse in Florida. We had this almost like an open forum where people would go and speak about racial issues. And I remember I went up to the mic because I was pretty passionate. And what I had said nowadays, thank God we didn't have Instagram back then, but it was so cringe. I was saying some really like entrenched, like my parents' kind of views. And
Yeah,
then now, as an adult, having lived and traveled the world and listened to other people and their experiences, it kind of transformed me a little bit in the sense of what I had was a slice of the pie and I wasn't seeing the whole picture.
sure.
So for this movie, I wanted to kind of, you know, I've done stand up, so I really like that idea of looking at everything from every perspective and like trying to find the thing that is like right on the money. And so I felt like this was a really good commentary on privilege and to add to it a ridiculous conspiracy, like a, horror
Yeah.
element to it.
No, what you just said is so interesting because it's like I was just talking to a university professor about this, and he was saying that the kids are exactly the same than they were 20 years ago, right? So you're like in your teenager and you're when 9/11 happened, it's the technology that changed, right? So now they're outputting their thoughts and feelings where you generally speaking, when you're a teenager, you're just supposed to take things in because you don't know anything, right? But now they're just like you said. You imagine when you were 13 that conversation went on Instagram or social media, and it's there forever. So that your viewpoint as a 13, 14-year old is documented and on social media for forever, I guess, right? And imagine how scary that is. But that's what's happening with this generation, right?
Yeah, it is. We don't know eventually where that'll lead. My hope would be that it can illustrate how there is an arc to people, that the views and the
Hopefully.
yeah, I
Yeah.
hope so.
Yeah.
So maybe in the future, some of these kids that have posted or shared things and expressed particular views can go back and say, "Hey, I had that viewpoint, and then now I've had so much time to grow as a human being. This is how far along I have come." So that's
But you
a
understand there's a lot of irony to that because this is the generation that wants to cancel people for making a mistake 10 years ago, right? They want to cancel Lincoln, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, the famous feminist Lincoln,
Yeah.
it's there's always an issue with, and I hope people can understand. And if you want to be a better writer, like if you're writing for characters, understanding the real world, like FDR, an incredible person for unions, did so much great work for the youth with the CCC, helped really keep our country in track, and had so much
He saved the
control.
country. He
He
saved
saved the
like yeah,
country,
with the New Deal. Yeah. Yeah. So
but then he also enslaved a bunch of Japanese Americans in concentration
yeah.
camps. So you learn the flaws of people and how people kind of like, I love that show Breaking Bad because it really illustrates the Walter White character so well, where there's a lot of like gray area, and a lot of true human beings tend to be like that. And so that kind of perception, I believe, would help maybe younger writers be less reactionary and more inquisitive and curious before you criticize, so that you can help create more diverse and expansive characters.
Yeah. It's a lens that you grew up with. Like you said, you were 9/11, you were 14, 15 years old. You're from Florida. You're from this community. You only know what you know, right? So
Correct. Yeah.
like it's just that's become and then so if you're Lincoln, you're basically brought up, you're in this era, you only know what like it's sort of like even FDR, like you said, like you basically people were scared, like Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor. Think about the lens of that. Think about what just happened in 9/11. You said 9/11. Think about how people reacted to Muslims and people from Afghanistan and after 2001, right? And look what they did too back then. It was like in like they nobody could there's you know what I mean. It's the lens that you're in the era that you're in. It's fear, right? We all were acting on our fear. It's just I just find it interesting that what you're bringing up in this film because it's there's a lot to take in, and it's even the way you structured it. It's like it's almost two halves, right? Where like you're giving this ideology in a comedic way, so it's not you're not telling the audience what to think because you're being funny. And then the second act is just this total murder. It's a murder scene, right? So it's so interesting how you made this film.
Well, it was really fun. So, just a little historical context.
Yeah,
My dad actually grew up and was alive during Pearl Harbor.
yeah,
So he always remembered that. My sister has lived in Hawaii for like 30 years. He went to go visit, saw Pearl Harbor, and still had this almost resentment towards Japanese
yeah.
people because the people around him went to the war. He had terrible
People
eyesight.
died, right? They killed
Lots
people.
of people died.
Yeah.
So he couldn't even get in the war, all these kinds of things. I mean, at that point, he was too young, but later on in Vietnam, things like that. But what I found so interesting is just when you are a slice of the pie, you have to see the whole picture to truly get it. And so I wanted to kind of contextualize this story by bringing it back thousands of years where it originally started. And I felt like the vessel to tell the truth was comedy because it lands the punch a little softer,
Yeah.
and people become more willing to listen to what you're trying to say.
Well, you're seeing that with like how with Jon Stewart and like what's his name, John Oliver. They're like their reaction to like Fox News is comedy, right? Like they're saying this is ridiculous and let's laugh about it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, I grew up, I would say Jon Stewart in The Daily Show, thank God it's back, because it really did characterize and define how I felt about what was going on in the mid 2000s in a way that I, as a teenager, really couldn't understand and express. So
yeah.
to have that show come back, I don't know, maybe it's just for us people now, but I hope that a younger generation can see that and be inspired.
Well, he's so as we're doing this podcast, he just came back last week. I don't know if he did a show yesterday, but he's only doing it once a week. And it's like an hour show, I guess, right? And he doesn't there's nothing for him to lose, right? He's just his first episode, it's almost like he didn't miss a step. He just basically just like went out there and just hit a home run, right? And pissed
It's
people off too, right? At the
Yeah,
end.
which if people don't remember, that's exactly what he did back then.
Yeah.
It was like,
But now it's social media. Now that his video, his little monologue about Biden just goes on Twitter, and then people like go crazy about it, right? So it's a different his even though he left in 2016, the world has completely changed now. 8 years later, now that he's doing the show. So
I think that's the hardest part for content creators, no matter what it is you're creating, is we do live in this hyper loop of reaction. So it's driven by outrage that gets the most engagement. But when you're trying to create, like, for me, for example, like longer content, I'm not really concerned about what people might feel, right? There's a longer narrative that takes time to ingest and to understand and to process. And we live in this world of like 15-second videos. Like, you got to keep eyes on the thing and then keep. And that's just, it's a tough time for, I would say, creators right now, especially when there's a sea of content.
yeah, it's driven by negativity, like you said. Like it's about someone judging what you just said or what you just did, right? So
Correct.
yeah. All right, so let's talk about the making of this film. So what have you done previously from a director standpoint before this film?
I had done a bunch of music videos for friends. I had done a couple like comedic videos during the pandemic, basically explaining like true crime. Um, then I did a short film just on my own in my own apartment, that I kind of didn't really know what I was doing, but it really did give me the experience to understand what kind of filmmaker I am, because I learned a lot of from my mistakes. At that time, also, I was a first team PA here in New York City for a Dick Wolf show.
Oh wow, okay.
So we were doing a lot of exterior overnight shots in New Jersey in below freezing temperatures, but it really was a good thing because it taught me the etiquette on set,
Mm-hmm.
how to correspond and work with different departments, because it is working with snakes. If you do the wrong thing, people will snap at you. And if you're so new to it, like I was and still am, I would say, they get you. They find your vulnerabilities and they get you, and you got to be quick. So it really trained me how to be on set, how to respect each department, and more importantly, how do you get them all to work together? Because it's truly, whether it's a great film or not, it's an impressive miracle when it all comes together
Yeah.
and it's just done. So having a great respect for that and learning a little bit about how these super big productions do it helped me go, oh, well, you know what? I know how to get around that. We don't need a super fancy light or a crazy big camera there. I mean,
Yeah.
that whole thing was shot on an iPhone.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, we have that in common. I worked as a PA in Toronto for a couple of years, and it was like, forget about film school. That's the education right there. It was like you work on these big budget movies, these $100 million movies, and you're seeing how the machine works, right? And like you're talking about department heads, everybody, like you're talking about from the art department to the transportation department to camera to sound, different personalities, right? Different like lighting, like the gaffer guys, the grips, all these different personalities, right? And then the above the line people, like the actors and the directors are living in this little world, right? Like they're working on something creatively while the machine is taking care of them in a lot of ways. So
Oh,
yeah,
it's total chaos. And I'll never forget, for months, I would always hear, because I'm like a very positive person just in general.
yeah,
I'm like, hey, how are you doing today? Okay, no problem. I got you. They're like, yeah, you're not made for this industry. You're too nice. You're too kind. You're too positive. And I was like, really? But I was like, no, I think that's what makes me a force for good, because I care about getting this thing done, that I will do no whatever it takes to make it happen.
yeah,
But I think keeping an energy of positivity is it just is it just rubs off on other people. Like, it's very conducive to keeping people motivated and getting things done. And that's why I really do love being on set, working with folks, problem solving. Man, if you can be obsessed with problem solving, then maybe you're cut out for this.
it's just burnout, right? Like it's being jaded because you're working these long days. And sometimes you work on these movies or even TV shows where like you're going into overtime all the time. And then so you're working 16, 18-hour days, and the turnaround, because the actors union, they have to have a 12-hour turnaround. So then you start the Monday morning at 7 a.m. and then you finish Friday at like your call time's at 1 p.m. and then you finish it like in the middle of the night on Saturday morning, and then you have like a half a day to get rest, and then you have to go right back to it on Monday. So you have no life, and then all of a sudden 2 months go by and you're like completely tired and you're burned out and you hate the industry, and that's how you get negative. That's how people get negative, as you
Yeah,
described.
and
Yeah,
maybe you accidentally said the wrong thing to one person, and
yeah,
then that goes up the line, and then you're off the show.
yeah,
And then when you try to get on the next gig to pay your rent, they don't call you back or
yeah.
you're not on it. And so it's
That's
like there's a
yeah,
conspiratorial inner monologue that can happen because, a lot of people, they get their egos bruised quite easily.
yeah. And then it's also like a class system, meaning that you're a PA, then you want to be an assistant location manager, and then there's a kind of hierarchy that you're going up, right? So say you're a TAD or a fourth AD, you want to be a third AD, then the second AD. There's all this, like, you know what I mean? Like you're like a camera, you know what I mean? Like you're basically changing the camera reel, and then you want to be the focus puller. You want to be the camera up. You know what I mean? There's all these like, so you're always worried about kind of moving up the ladder, I guess, too, right?
Yeah, and I think everyone's there for different
Yeah,
reasons, right? Like a lot of the PAs are just collecting call sheets so they can hit that magic number and become an AD.
yeah,
Some people are really, I mean, every single PA I've met has something amazing to teach me and is either a writer, a musician, an actor, and they're just there because they want to be on set in the energy in it. And I feel like those people that show up and just do it, those are the ones that are going to be incredible filmmakers or writers or actors or musicians or whatever because they just day in day out keep showing up and just keep coming.
but then the secret is, and I'm being biased when I say this, is that you have to get out. You get in
Yeah.
and then you figure it out, and you got to get the hell out of there, because then if you stay longer, then capitalism takes its head, where you're getting starting to get paid really well, and it's like, oh my god, then you get a mortgage, and all of a sudden you get married and you have kids, and it's like your dreams have been shattered because of comfortability, right? So
Yeah, well, you still have to feed your soul. You
yeah.
still have to get out there and do your thing.
Yeah,
Because if
which is
not,
hard because,
then
like I said, you're working these long hours. It's hard to do your own thing, right?
absolutely. And that's why I got out right before the pandemic. Thank God I did. I mean, trust your gut because
Yeah.
sometimes it really will lead you down a path that serves you well.
So I want to talk about the second half of your film, because I think that the actors who are in this film are fantastic, and even the way you directed it, it's all kind of from your point of view. Like you're sitting down, you're seeing these like people, like your character's sister, the guy you end up killing, the other guy, and it's all from their point of view, and it's such an interesting kind of directing style that you did, right? Even the location in the basement, which reminded me
Yes.
of like the 1980s, like it's got this kind of like, even the trophy, it was like a
Oh, yeah.
trophy that I got when I was like 10, that
Yep.
he kills him with, you know what I mean? Like it was like a base, you know what I mean? It's such an interesting kind of like way you kind of directed the film. Did you like storyboard things before you went to set, or like how did you kind of like figure out your shot list?
I storyboarded it. I had a shot list and I almost ended up throwing all of it out because it was too big. I wanted it to be in this like big mansion, but I didn't have access to a location like that or
Yeah,
the budget to do it. So I tossed that. One of my best friends, he ended up being the cinematographer on it. His girlfriend's parents had this awesome, perfect house in Forest Hills. And when we got there, he had sent me an iPhone video of the inside, but we ended up going down this stairwell that had these cobwebs and then this broken closet with this super old air
yeah,
conditioner and like almost this like laundromat situation, and they had all these trophies, and I bought a custom made trophy with the whole thing on it from that kind of time to look like what I wanted
yeah,
specifically. And I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. Like, we don't need to go anywhere else. We're shooting the whole thing here. So we spent the whole day. And I just really wanted to illustrate the point because I have met so many people where they're like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm an artist, a musician, whatever. And they're like, no, 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 but what do you actually do? And they're like, oh, so you're just a server. Because I was, been serving at restaurants and
yeah,
bartending. And I just really wanted to capture that. And so I felt like the best way to really do it was my character had to be sitting down and everybody else had to be standing up looking down on him.
yeah.
And it just had to work that way. And then again, going down into the darkness where he is on this super important phone call and his character flips. he's not the super nice boyfriend anymore. He's like the dickish landlord. So that transformation had for me had to happen instantly.
Yeah, I thought there's a. It reminded me. I don't know if this is if you've even seen this movie, but it reminded me of The Graduate in a sense, where like,
Oh, definitely.
okay, yeah, you know, like everybody's coming to him, right? Where it's like,
Yes.
yeah, it got the Mike Nichols kind of vibe to it. That's what I. Then it's like it's almost like if that character. Sorry, the name escapes me. What Dustin Hoffman's character played, but if that character was a murderer.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
he snaps, right? Like it's like, oh, it's too I have too many options. It's like I'm too white and like, you know what I mean? So I kind of like
Definitely.
that. So then tell me that the guy who played the landlord, who's fantastic, by the way, he
Oh
reminds
yeah.
me of so many different people, but did you tell him to wear the mustache? Tell him to grow a mustache, or did he already have it?
No, so funny enough, I had already cast this once, but because of the actor strike, some of the people I got the SAG kind of waiver, right? Because it's just me and my credit card.
Yeah.
But they ended up pulling out. A lot of people felt weird about making something, so I ended up reaching out to a buddy of mine who we had produced another short film, and he's like, "Oh, you should check out this guy. He does a lot of like off Broadway play theater." And so I reached out to him. He said yes. And it was funny because I used AI to kind of, make a lookbook for people to kind of show what the characters were, what
Yeah.
their backstory was. And he looked exactly like the character, the mustache, the, just his whole look was perfect. So he ended up coming in, and this is why I really loved working. So that's his real girlfriend in real life,
Okay.
and she's also an off-Broadway actress, and they were incredible because I think when you work with stage actors, they're used to just doing it in one take, whereas on-screen actors, they're used to getting like a bunch of takes in. So every time we did it, they were just like spot on. So it only took us 3 or 4 takes to get all of that.
So Haley Bond, that's her name, right? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah,
Very
she's
brief role,
phenomenal.
but she's like I said, totally fantastic in the role. Like you totally believed to these characters, right? So
Oh yeah. I mean, I really don't like giving actors notes. I like for them to kind of make a decision and just go with it, especially if I've seen them in an audition and I like what they're doing. And when I was on the set, in that first rehearsal, I was like, "This is it. Don't say anything," because I really didn't want to throw them off.
yeah,
And then in the end, I was like, "Okay, let's do this a little bit different, but I just want you guys to do this for you." And then, of course, that's the take I ended up using.
gotcha. That's amazing. And then so the last scene, the airport, when you're at the airport, where did you shoot that?
The TWA terminal
Yeah, it
at
reminded me
JFK.
of Catch Me If You Can, right? When that scene,
Oh yeah,
yeah, it's got that vibe, right? Where it's just like this long, kind of narrow. So you shot it there, like, and was this was in like what airport was that at?
this is in JFK.
Okay,
It's in one of the terminals. It's not in use as an actual terminal. It's a hotel. They have a bar and like a restaurant. It's really pretty. I mean, it really encapsulates that era.
yeah, 100%. And you just grabbed that scene, I guess, right? You just
Oh,
went
I would say I stole the shot for sure.
yeah, the red, the kind of yeah, the redness, right? So you just went
Oh,
in,
it's
you went in the lounge and just took and grabbed the shot.
Yeah, I mean, I took my iPhone. Me and my girlfriend just went in. We didn't have any like booms or lights or anything like that. The lighting is actually quite good if you, adjust your exposure and ISO and kind of play. But luckily for us, it was a cloudy day, and so that really helped with too much sun overexposing. So we went in and just shot it in like 20 minutes.
So because you got it's the red theme, right? Where the blood, the over the top blood, or when you kill the guy, and then you have the redness of the airport hangar, I guess, right?
Yes, that was very crucial. I had always wanted to shoot in there, but I was very concerned with getting the rights. But in the end, I was like, you know what? It's a short film. We're not selling this. We're not going to distribute it. So let's just get it just because it's a cool shot.
Yeah, don't even worry. Yeah, I'm not saying be a criminal, but basically don't. I wouldn't tell people don't even worry about that stuff. If you need the rights, you can get it afterwards. You know how many times I've people who sold their film and they ripped off a shot and they went back and they got the rights of a scene afterwards. So you can even do that too. If worst case scenario.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess for anyone listening, it's a good lesson in don't be afraid to ask. Cause sometimes I'm always like, ask for forgiveness, not for permission.
Yeah,
But when I was going through making this film, there was this very specific organization that's like a brass ensemble, and they are notorious for taking stuff down. And I was like, man, I really want to use this in the film. It's like crucial for my vision. And I just sent him an email and I was like, hey, I'm not a student. I want to make a short film. I'm not selling it. It's going to be film festivals and YouTube only. And sure enough, back and forths happen, and they gave me the rights to use this song. So you just never know.
So they on YouTube when someone rips off their music, they kind of they take it down. Is that what happens? You're
They
saying?
are notorious for copyright strikes. Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah. And people don't want the copyright strikes. So what's in the future for you? What do you are you going to make a sequel? Are you going to make a feature of this? Or I know
I would
it's
love to make
you're said
a
and done.
feature. I would just need to get the money,
Yeah.
which is always a real part of it. But there's two things that I'm working on now that I think, you know, you just got to work with what you got. And I have a dog, so I'm working on this short film that's a horror film, but from the perspective of a dog. So that's a really fun, weird, experimental one. And then I have a buddy who works in a hospital, so I have access to this hospital, and that one's a little more serious. Like it's still a horror, but it's a short film that I want to do with that location.
Oh, well, fantastic. It's like, yeah, keep making movies. It's like this one, like I said, this is an original kind of take of a short. Like I said, I see a lot of them I don't you don't know what's gonna happen next. And you're kind of like laughing, but then you're laughing uncomfortably because it's like, should I be laughing? It's and the performances are top notch, including yourself, obviously. Like
Oh, thank you.
it's like it's finding that tone, right? Where it's like it's like it's got to be a little bit tinge of realism, but at the same time you're making a satire, if that makes any sense, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've learned from stand up is if you're trying to be funny, it's not going to be funny. If you say something real and honestly, it will be funny.
yeah, that makes yeah that's great advice right there. All right, man. Let's talk again when you make your next film. We're very honored to show this film at the festival. I hope it does well for you. And like you said, you just kind of went out there and did it, and it's a kind of an amazing story. So keep at it, and let's hopefully we'll talk again in the future.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor and an absolute pleasure. You all are fantastic.